Hello, everybody. So this is Phil. I am obviously coughing up a storm right now. So I wanted to do a video on Prop 5 because we're winding down and we're getting close to the election. For once, this is not a bond bill, so you don't have to worry about that. Here's the big deal about this one. So Proposition 5 deals with something called Proposition 13. Most people know what that is, but for those who don't, in 1978, the California voters passed a proposition that would deal with property taxes on new homes, right? So if you had a home, property tax would go up by a certain amount every year. What Prop 13 did was say, well, hold on. We're going to change that formula. They pegged home values to 1978, and they said, look, under only a few instances can property taxes go up. One, we're going to peg them to the 1978 market value of your home, and they will go up by at most 2% a year. Excuse me. And so once they're done going up by 2% a year, instead of what it was at, which I think essentially it increased with the speculated value of the property. So let's say your house was $100,000 and then next year it became like $120,000. Your property taxes would go up by 20%, right? Effectively, roughly. So this slowed that down significantly, much to the great celebration of people who own property in this state. The other way that property values can go up under Proposition 13 is if the house is sold to a new owner, right? Once there's a revaluation of that property, what will happen is the 1978 value will get adjusted and it will become the value of the year in which that property was sold. It will become that market value, right? And then it'll increase by 2% up until it gets sold again and again and again. This has had the effect, obviously, whenever you get rid of a tax, and this is going to be a big theme of the Prop 6 issue too, whenever you get rid of a tax, what you end up doing is getting rid of revenue, right? So you'll see polls like this all the time. If people are asked, hey, do you like new money for nice new things? They tend to say yes, right? Because we want money for nice new things. But then when they're subsequently asked, hey, would you like your taxes going up by 5 or 10%? For some reason they say no. People like money. And people also like their money being spent on good things. And people think they should control their money, but people also think the government should do what it wants. It's the great dismay of every sort of political watcher ever, right? The people are inconsistent. People are inconsistent. And again, this theme is going to really pop up in Prop 6 and kind of the chicanery that went with there. But let's just, to roll back to Prop 5. Prop 5 also, Prop 13 / Prop 5. Proposition 13 was amended a couple of times, most significantly by Proposition 60 and 90. And what Proposition 60 did was it said that, hey, look, if you go from House A to House B, and House B has a lower market value than House A, you can essentially transfer your prior property tax payments to House B. And that was it, right? There's a huge problem with Prop 60. It's completely irrelevant now, right? Let's think about this for a minute. If you've had a house for about 30 to 40 years, and by the way, this only affected people who are 55 and older, right? So for people my age, we don't get to take advantage of this. So, if you've had a house for 30 or 40 years, this isn't, of course the house you're going to buy next is going to be more valuable than the house that you bought at that time, right? So, and even if it's not, like, for people wanting to move, the chances of houses being less expensive than the house they paid for, keep in mind, we're not talking about the house at the current time, right? We're talking about the house for property tax purposes as defined by Proposition 13. And Proposition 13, essentially, it's like Jurassic Park, right? You know the mosquito and the amber? That's Proposition 13. Essentially freezes everything in the time that you bought it, right? So your house is a mosquito in that amber. And that mosquito basically that's what you're comparing. You're comparing those mosquitoes. You're comparing that house with the house that you're about to buy. Well, obviously, because of our housing crisis, every house has gained artificially in value. So, of course, the idea that you can go from a more expensive house to a cheaper house isn't going to happen. Even if your house is valued at like $1 million, when you bought it, it was probably a third of that, and maybe even a fourth of that. Right? And the house you're inevitably going to buy is bigger than that, right? Is more valuable than that. Even if it's not actually bigger, right? Even if you downsize, it's still going to be more expensive than the price that you paid per Prop 13 terms. So Proposition 60 didn't do jack. It did nothing, right? Even though people think it did a whole lot of things, right now it's doing nothing. So then came along Proposition 90, and Proposition 90 said, well, let me rewind. Proposition 60 only affected intra-county transfers, right? So if I live in Stockton and I want to go to Modesto, can't do that, right? And if I'm 55, I can't do that and take advantage of Prop 13, or Prop 60, whatever, okay? Can't take advantage of that property tax transfer. Okay, I have to be in the same county. So Prop 90 purported to fix that by saying, oh, yeah, look, you can do inter-county transfers as long as both counties are part of the same program. And so counties far and wide signed up for this, all 11 out of 58 of them. None of them are anywhere near the Central Valley, but if you're watching this and you're not part of the Central Valley, you're talking about 11 counties out of 58. There's a decent chance your county's not amongst them. I will provide a link showing you which counties are part of that program. And so Proposition 90 expanded the Proposition 60's allowance for people to take advantage of their low kind of Prop 13 tax burden and that allow that transferability. So essentially, Prop 90 said in certain situations you can transfer between counties. Well, here comes Prop 5. And Prop 5 says, well, okay, we've looked at Prop 90, and Prop 90 basically doesn't allow us to do anything because very few counties signed up. So what Prop 5 purports to do is a couple of things. One, to just allow inter-county transfers. Right? Get rid of Prop 90 and its programs and whatever. Just you don't need it. You don't want the county permission. You can transfer between all 58 counties. Right? Again, this only affects people who are 55 and older. We're only talking about people who are 55 and older here. Okay? And this is most important, it now allows you to take advantage of a lower property tax burden when you shift to a more expensive house. And there's a formula for it. And it creates two formulas. If you happen to go from a more expensive to a less expensive house, like in the Prop 60 days, what you do is essentially you take the market value of your new home and you divide it by the market value of your current home, as it was back then, and you take whatever percentage that is, you pay that percentage of the income of the property taxes on your new home. So if you bought a $120,000 home, I know these numbers are not real, right? If you bought a $120,000 home and then you later bought a $100,000 home, you would get effectively a 1/6 reduction in your property taxes on the new home. For people who want to increase their property burden, what it does is basically says, okay, so if you're buying a $500,000 home and you had a $400,000 home, your tax burden will be subtracted by the amount of the market value difference. So, $500,000 minus $400,000, that $100,000 will be lobbed off the tax formula, right? Which means when you pay property taxes under Prop 13, it's effectively like you're paying for your old home, right? Minus the market value. So, the idea of this is the belief of this is that so people of 55 and older can be more mobile, right? They can move from county to county and from home to home. And admittingly, this affects, when you're talking about people who can afford more expensive homes, you're talking about one generalized group, basically the wealthy, right? And that's the main objection. That's one of two main objections that the no vote on Prop 5 has. This is, look, this really affects the wealthy people. This really affects people who have the ability to move. And that's true, right? Like in a sense that obviously people my age can't take advantage of this. I think the rebuttal to this argument is simply that one of the biggest problems with our housing market is a lack of supply, right? And California is obviously trying to build new houses. We heard about that in Prop 1. That's obviously a concern of the state, right? Streamlining the building of new homes, right? But as we also heard in Prop 1, a lot of those are multifamily units, duplexes, apartments, things of that nature. You're not talking about, as much as you want to, single-family homes. So the single-family home, assuming Prop 1 passes, which I think it will, even though I'm a no vote on it. So the single-family unit, right, there's still going to be a restriction on that supply. That's not going to grow by as much as we want it to. And keep in mind, houses need to be basically built at like 100,000 more units a year than they are currently. Right? We discussed that in my Prop 1 video. So here's the big deal. Right? This frees up supply. Why? It frees up supply for cheaper homes. Because if you're under the guise that the wealthy are going to move to more expensive homes, then similarly, you would believe that those cheaper homes are going to be put up on the market. Right? And I don't think we're just talking about San Francisco and LA. Keep in mind, a lot of those counties do count in that 11 county Prop 90 transfer issue. Right? We're talking about people maybe moving out east, right? Moving away from the city, moving away from the hustle and the bustle, and moving to a more quiet existence. Right? It frees up a lot of cheaper homes, or not, maybe slightly below market value homes, for people like us, the younger people, to come into. So essentially, I think the argument is it frees up a chokehold on supply. So that's how it benefits us, right? Like whenever there's a push, there's a pull when it comes to the market. So the push favors the 55-year-old plus people with money, but the pull might favor everybody else, right? Because it frees up potentially cheaper homes for us to buy. The second main objection to Prop 5 is that it reduces tax revenue, and this one's sort of hard to refute, right? When you are allowing people to pay less taxes on more expensive homes, then, the Legislative Analysis Office says you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars across the state, right? Maybe even reaching $1 billion. Now, that's speculative, right? But everything about this whole argument is speculative, because you don't know how many people are going to take advantage. The less people that take advantage of it, the closer to the status quo that we hew, right? And the less of an effect the proposition has writ large. But if you're talking about a bill or sort of property that kind of gets to the how do I say this? If you're talking about something that has a greater effect, really, I think the question. There's a lot of moving parts here. Yes. Property taxes directly go to school districts and things of that nature. So yes, this will mean less funding for school districts, right? Inevitably. How much is up to debate, but it's axiomatic that the more of an effect this has, the less money people will have. Now, the proponents have countered with an interesting argument, which is, well, let's think about this, though. If more and more people move, you have more market mobility, prices of houses go up, and therefore, tax revenues will inevitably go up anyway, because while they are paying less taxes, they're still paying more because of the greater value. The bigger problem I have with that rebuttal is, one, you're still paying less than you would under the status quo, and two, how do I put this, right? Like, it kind of depends where you think the problem lies. Do you think there's a demand problem with housing, or do you think there's a supply problem with housing? I think there's a supply problem with housing, right? I think you need more supply, right? Not more demand. The opponents of Prop 5 sort of counter, and I think it's a decent counter, that a lot of these wealthy people are going to have more disposable income, especially because of Prop 5, and they're going to say, look, at the same time, they're going to have more disposable income, and so they're going to drive up prices kind of on their own, even artificially higher than their market value, and that may be true. Of course, then that feeds into the argument that the opponents are saying. So, in short, my thinking is that this frees up supply, and this allows people to, with that supply, get more into cheaper housing. That's why I support Prop 5, right? But, I mean, that's a prediction. I'm making a guess. And I'm making a guess based off several economic assumptions. One, that supply is the problem, not demand. And two, that this will inevitably lead to cheaper houses and not necessarily houses that are above market value, right? Three, that we're not talking about people in high-income areas, right? That we're talking about people across the board, right? That not certain specific counties aren't affected, that it affects the whole state writ large. Those are the assumptions I'm making, right? Any of those assumptions could be wrong. I don't think they're wrong. I think they're true enough to the point where I think you will see at least some mobility on the subject. I think in terms of the property tax discussion, if there is a decrease in property taxes, let's be frank, people are just going to put up local bonds and fund it that way, right? So what, for example, the city of Stockton does and has been able to do under California law is increase their sales tax to fund a specific thing, usually in Stockton's case, police, firefighters, and libraries, right? There's no way, right, that they couldn't do that for bonds for schools. I think if that happens, then what would happen is that local citizens, including, by the way, so let's sort of take this kind of like sort of a larger example. You're somebody 55 and older moves to a different locality. That locality, possibly because of that move, experiences less taxes. So they propose a bond to increase taxes in other ways. They can't do property taxes, but they propose a bond to increase sales taxes or whatnot. Or they just say we're going to sell a bond and make up the shortfall. And that homeowner votes yes on that bond. In that situation, at least then you have local people voting where local money goes, right? So in that situation, at least localities get to determine their own money. So I inevitably think that's how the shortfall will be made, right? These things aren't puzzles in and of themselves. They're puzzle pieces. When you take away one puzzle piece, nature abhors a vacuum. They will find another. They will find another piece that fits. Right, and as we've been talking the last 4 or 5 times, bonds are going to be there. So my big thesis is this. I'm a yes on 5. I could be wrong, though. I easily could be wrong on this. My economic assumptions could be wrong. This thing could drive home prices through the roof because it just allows rich people to go through places and it doesn't open up the supply that's needed for people like me. Right? That could entirely be true. What is definitely true is that if that does happen, there will be less economic funds for schools and things of that nature, which are typically funded through property taxes. But my rebuttal to that would be that inevitably people will see that shortfall and will make up for it in other ways, as we've seen in California. They will issue bonds, right, which I generally oppose, but at the same time, they generally get passed, right? This is political reality. So to argue that this inevitably creates a no way out situation is false. It creates potentially a problem that can be fixed by people later, and they can be fixed by local people later, determining the local sort of direction of their schools and if this is something they really want to fund, which they typically do, because we were talking about schools here. So at the end of the day, I support 5 because I think it relieves a burden on people. It lowers their taxes. I think generally lower taxes are a good thing. Because with with the lower taxes, you create disposable income, which, by the way, California likes disposable income because they can tax that way. But at least then, you create more wealth and more disposable income that way. Then California can take a chunk out of that fund too, right? So it creates more money for people to essentially generate wealth with, which benefits California because California runs primarily on income tax. And while there are definite obvious drawbacks, those drawbacks can be mediated, and I think they will be. So I will talk about Prop 6 probably later tonight, and I will post that video. In the interim, thank you guys for listening, and have a nice day.